Rick didn't seem like himself that day. Normally, he was outgoing and energetic and involved with everything that was going on at the program. And I have to admit that Rick was probably my favorite client. Because you see, I was 22 and he was 29. This was my first job out of college. I had been hired as a psychiatric caseworker at a community mental health center in rural Clearfield County. And he was one of my first clients. And I worked hard with him, and he and I were like a team. Because I came out of Penn State armed with a bachelor's degree and the career goal of wanting to help people. And I felt like Rick and I were working together to really help him manage his psychiatric illness, to get a job coach, and to get a part-time job. But on this day, he wasn't himself. He wasn't speaking to other people. He kept his winter coat on in the program, and it was really hot in the building, and I knew something was off, so I listened to my instincts, and while the morning group got started, I asked him to come with me back to the doctor's office. Now, we were in an old Woodward school. It was called the Old Woodward School. It was an old high school building. This was in 1988, when community mental health was getting a lot of money to try to help keep people in the community. And so, if you can believe it, we had renovated the coal bin into a small 10 by 10, what we called the doctor's office. And so he didn't speak to me, but he followed me back, and it was kind of in the back away from the rest of the program. And so I went in the door, and I went around the big, large desk and sat back behind it, and he came in, shut the door, and sat right in front of the door. I made small talk with him. I was trying to find out what was going on. I was kind of easing into it. When all of a sudden, he leaned forward and he pulled out of his coat a large butcher knife. And he leaned forward over the table and he said, "Look what I have." I had never seen anyone look the way he did in that moment. Everything stopped. All I could remember was about a month before, I had gone to a crisis training program with my colleagues. Now, I was about 6 or 8 months into this job, and I was very young. But the first lesson we learned was flee with confidence. When faced with a situation where there was potentially harm for myself or for other people, you would flee with confidence as much as possible. Well, I had taken that option away from myself because there was no way I could get to the door, and there was no windows, and there was no way to alert anybody. The second lesson that I remembered in that moment was to speak clearly and slowly. When someone was in a psychiatric breakdown, they couldn't usually take in a lot of information. And so I said, "Rick, put down the knife." I said that over and over. Finally, he did. And he laid it on the desk, but he kept his hand over it, almost like wanting me to reach for it. And it took everything in my being not to. I started saying, "Rick, please take your hand away from the knife." Finally, he did. And he sat back. And he slumped in his chair, and he made this sound that I'll never forget. It was as if the weight of the world had fallen onto him. I reached slowly forward, and I slid the knife toward me, and I stood up, and I held it against my leg, and I slowly walked clear around the desk, and as I walked behind him, I said, "Rick, I'm going to get help." A couple hours later, I was in my own office then. We had handled everything. Rick was on his way to the hospital. And I had my head on my arms on my desk, sobbing out all the fear and just the unbelievableness of what had happened. And my boss, Mary, sat beside me, and she kept patting my leg, and she just let me cry out all of it. And as I did, I just kept saying all the things I had done wrong, every single thing I had done and how many people could have been hurt and all the horrible things, and she just kept patting me and reassuring me. Finally, I was able to sit back. She handed me a fistful of tissues, and I wiped my face, and I looked at her, and she said the things that you would think that she would say, but as she was talking, I couldn't really hear her. All I could think of was that helping people, like really, really helping people, was turning out to be a lot harder than it seemed. Thank you.